Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Shashi Kapoor from University Business School, Punjab University Regional Centre, Ludhiana. Today I am going to discuss about the module Strategic Risk Management under the paper Strategic Management. After completing this module, you will be able to understand the concept of risk and the strategic risk, the concept of enterprise risk management and the strategic risk management, different types of the strategic risk, risk assessment and risk management through different approaches. The different important phases of strategic management like strategy formulation, implementation, evaluation and control, etc. involve a time horizon and are based on number of assumptions related to different aspects like market, finance, economy and so on. Over a period of time, there are changes in the physical environment, especially in the country of investment, the economic activities of the industry, the marketplace and the financial arena, which leads to the risk of the success of strategy and achievement of overall objective of the organization. That's why the identification, measurement and management of such risk is very important to the success of the organization. So before studying the strategic risk management, let us discuss first of all the concept of the risk. The term risk owes to its origin to the classical Greek word rizikon, meaning root. The concept of risk is based on the degree of uncertainty. An event has many parameters associated with it. Depending upon their nature, some may be spatial and others may be temporal. When all the parameters are fixed, then the occurrence becomes a certainty. When some of those parameters are not clearly defined and the probability of their occurrence is not measurable, then event becomes uncertain. Between the two extremes of certainty and uncertainty lies the risk. Greater the uncertainty involved, larger the risk associated will be. It is the probability of occurrence of a hazardous event that adversely impacts a company. It is a potential harm that is likely to accrue due to any future event, the probability for which can be measured. Risk usually entails a negative impact. The degree of this impact can be measured in terms of the cost of assets, loss of revenue, loss of human life, or the loss of reputation to an organization, etc. The potential harm may arise from a future occurrence of an event that may lead to exorbitant increase in the cost or by failure to achieve an expected benefit. Risk can be of different types depending upon its source, impact and incidences. Some risk will not be a threat to the overall health of a company or its ability to achieve its objective. For example, a temporary data center outage can result in a short-term problem, but once resolved, the organization will be back on its track. Similarly, there can be some significant risk event resulting in the irreparable loss that can not only impair the organization's ability to meet its objective, but are also threat to the survival of the organization as well. So, the risks are simply the future problems that need to be avoided or mitigated. The enterprise risk management. Certainly, risk management in the organizations is not new. Different functional managers look at risk differently. HR looks at human capital risk, for example, risk of retaining talent, minimizing turnover, etc. Internal audit looks only at its set of risk. Financial manager looks at only financial risk, and operational managers look at risk involved his area only. Status was the same until past few decades or so, when it was realized that all such risks are interconnected with each other. It was the early 2000s when, in the wake of high profile corporate failures, the concept of enterprise risk management emerged. It attempts to manage enterprise wide risk in an integrated fashion. In September 2004, the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations of Tradeway Commission, which is recognized for providing guidance on critical aspects of organizational governance, business ethics, internal control, enterprise risk management, fraud, and financial reporting, issued guidelines that defined the enterprise risk management. According to COSO, ERM is a process affected by the board of directors, management, and other personnels involved in strategy setting and across the enterprise, designated to identify potential events that may affect the entity and manage risk to be within the risk appetite, to provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of objectives of the entity. The publication of this definition of ERM was a milestone. Yet today, companies still struggle with how to implement an effective ERM system. That may be because holistic performance management is still evolving and many companies lack a culture or mechanism for managing cross-enterprise issues. Three key components of COSO's ERM definition relate to strategy and strategy implementation. A. ERM is directly related to strategy setting. For effective ERM, it must be embedded in strategy formulation and execution. B. ERM is designated to identify events that may affect the effectiveness of its strategy. C. ERM is to provide a reasonable assurance for achieving organization's strategic objective. So it becomes very clear that strategy and ERM needs to be aligned and integrated. That's why effective strategic management becomes essential for achieving the objectives of an organization. So now, having a look on the risk, let us now discuss about the concept of strategic risk management. Increase in the significant risk exposures have given rise to a focus on the strategic risk and the strategic risk management. Strategic risks are those risks that are most consequential to the organization's ability to execute its strategies and achieving its business objectives. These are the risk exposures that can ultimately affect the shareholder values or the viability of the organization. Strategic risk management is organization's response to the strategic risk. Strategic risk management can be defined as the process of identifying, assessing, managing the risk in the organization's business strategy, including taking the swift action when risk is actually realized. Strategic risk management is focused on those most consequential and significant risk to shareholder values and requires the time and attention of the management and the board of directors of the company. It involves understanding the strategy clearly, all the risk involved in adopting and executing those strategies. It involves evaluation of how a wide range of possible events and scenarios will be affecting the formulation and execution of strategy and the ultimate impact on company's value. It requires the organization to identify tolerable level of risk as a guide for strategic decision making. It is a continuous process that should be embedded in strategy formulation and execution. Effective strategic management is built around a clear understanding of how much risk the organization is prepared to take in order to meet its strategic objectives, and a timely and reliable evaluation of how much risk is actually taking. Thus, board of directors need to improve their focus on risk by integrating the risk management into their routine strategic evaluation. The success of strategic risk management depends upon that how well the strategic planning and risk management is integrated and coordinated, and how well the performance measures are aligned with the risk management. Types of risk. In order to design an efficient structure for the risk management and to help in allocating the responsibility for managing different types of risk need to be appropriately categorized. One simple method can be to categorize the different types of risk on the basis of functional activities like financial risk, operational risk, or IT risk, etc. It is the responsibility of the board of directors to ensure effective management of risk that are fundamental to the organization's existence and prosperity and are having impact over day-to-day activities of the organization also. Keeping in mind the said objective, different risks can be categorized as follows. So here's a list of the different types of the strategic risk. It can be number one, the country risk, human component risk, the financial risk, the industry risk, market risk, transaction risk, stagnation risk, unique competitor risk, brand risk, risk related to a project, and it can be operational risk. Country risk. It can be an area of concern when business is being started in a foreign country. It can be either in form in government's control over raw material, licensing, or some other key business issues. It can also be caused due to changes by political influence rather than company's influence. For example, nationalization was adopted by many socialistic governments at some point of time and then was reversed due to exigencies in the market economy. Next category is human component risk. Many changes have been observed in the labor and management relationship since industrial revolution. The birth of trade unionism and collective bargaining as a source of strength for labor has brought sea changes in the labor management thoughts. The application of turnaround strategies, restructuring, downsizing, business process re-engineering, etc. have faced many risks in terms of human component such as safety nets for retiring employees, retaining existing employees to help them gaining the new skills, etc. The financial risk. Inflow of the capital in form of foreign direct investment may face the political risk at the strategic level. Policies favoring FDI may have toil against the policies favoring nationalization or strict government control. Inflow of capital through foreign institutional investors may face different risks caused by changes in the interest rate, political, and national exigencies. For example, the different interest rates in the different countries has introduced a risk that FIIs pull out funds from a country or enter another country in a big way, leading to a volatility in the interest rates and their differentials. A thin margin of profit may lead to the movement of FIIs from one country to another. Industry risk. This risk arises when a company itself faces extinction suddenly due to unavoidable reasons. Every industry is known having a life cycle comprising different stages like introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. Sometimes a company may have a fractured life and may face a sudden death. Mass customization has become the reality, and industry has to face up the situation. Threats caused by the internal rivalry among existing companies have also added to the complexity of an industry. Market risks. Market volatility has always been a reason for deviation from the desired course. Markets are no longer protected and have resulted in diverse business risk of demand supply imbalances, unexpected technological changes, and new exigencies in the corporate governance. The price mechanism has also changed. The belief that price takes care of all the factors of production is no longer correct because inefficiencies of any factor cannot be passed to the consumer. Customer behavior has become an important component of the value chain that needs to be carefully coordinated and thus adds to the risk. Transition risk. This risk may arise due to sudden technological obsolescence. This type of risk is more common in information technology field when new products based on latest technology are introduced very frequently. The life of a technology which is normally a decade or so suddenly finds itself out of the market. Stagnation risk. The stagnation risk may be caused by sudden fall in the demand for products of a company due to recession or other reasons. This type of risk is more harmful for companies holding large inventories of raw material and components. For example, when an automobile company is affected by stagnation, the business of different manufacturers supplying components will also suffer. The next is unique competitor risk. This risk may arise due to sudden entrance of an unexpected competitor. This risk is a culmination of the big resource, high technology, and managerial skill that the new competitor possessed. For example, entry of big corporate houses like Reliance, Bharti, and Birla Groups, etc., in the retail trade has posed a risk for small shopkeepers and street vendors. Brand risk. Every company builds its market share on the basis of its brand equity and brand loyalty. If due to any reason such brand loses its sheen, suddenly the brand risk emerges and company may face virtual extinction from the market. This unexpected happening can take place due to loss of confidence from the customer on the value of brand and may not be able to market its products for a substantial period of time. The next one is a project risk. This type of risk arises when a project fails to take off due to sudden and drastic changes in some of the basic assumptions. A project normally extends over a long period of time, and entire economy of a project is based on many assumptions. In case such assumptions are not fully tested or verified, the project may come to a sudden failure. Operational risk. Operational risk is the risk of loss resulting from inadequate or failed internal processes, people, and systems, or from any external event. It arises from execution of the normal day-to-day operations of a company. It is a risk associated with any failed process within the organization. For example, any type of fraud in the organization, damage to the physical assets, any kind of business disruption and system failure, etc. Students, let's now talk about the strategic risk management process. Assessment of the strategic risk is very much essential for the effective risk management. Strategic risk assessment is a systematic and continual process for assessing the most significant risk driven by companies' core strategies. Conducting an initial assessment of risk is always valuable activity and should involve senior management and board of directors also. If risk strategic assessment is not embedded and owned by management as integral part of the business processes, then the strategic risk management will rapidly lose its impact and will not add any value to the organization. So, the following steps may be undertaken by an organization for managing the strategic risk. So, this diagram shows us the different stages of the strategic risk management process. In the first stage, we have to understand the core strategies of an organization. Once the strategies are understood, the next job is to collect the data on the risk which are associated with the different strategies which are being formulated and implemented by the concerned organization. Depending upon the nature of the data collected, a preliminary strategic profile will be framed. And once such profile is framed, the next stage is to validate the risk profile. And after developing this risk profile, the next stage is to formulate a strategic risk management plan. Once the plan is formulated, the next stage is to share this risk profile and risk management plan throughout the organization with all the concerned employees and the departments. And of course, the last stage would be to execute the risk management plan in the organization. Understanding the core strategies. To gain a thorough understanding, the strategies of a company is an initial step for the risk assessment process. Some organizations may have well developed strategic plans and objectives, while others may be much more informal in their articulation and documentation of strategy. In either case, the assessment must develop an overview of the organization's key strategies and business objectives. This step is critical because without these key data to focus around, company will not be able to prioritize the risk. It helps in establishing a foundation for integrating risk management with the business strategy. Collecting data on strategic risk. After having a deep understanding of the strategies, next step is to collect the information and data related to the strategic risk. Said information can be collected by conducting surveys and interviews of key executives, internal and external auditors, and other people whose views can be significant to the types of risk involved, such as compliance or safety. Views of these key individuals regarding potential emerging risk can also be considered. Preparing the preliminary strategic profile. After analyzing the information collected in the previous step, the next stage is to draft a preliminary profile for strategic risk of the organization. The extent of information to be disclosed in the profile will be depending upon the need of an organization. For some organizations, simple lists are adequate, while others may want more details as part of the profile. At a minimum, the profile should clearly communicate a concise list of the top risks and their potential severity or ranking. Color-coded reports or heat maps may be useful to ensure clarity of communication of this critical information. Validating the strategic risk profile. The preliminary risk profile must be validated, refined, and finalized, depending upon how the data gathering was accomplished. This step could involve validation with all or a portion of the key executives and directors. It is critical, however, to gain sufficient validation to prevent major disagreements on the final risk profile. The next stage is developing strategic risk management plan. Once the risk profile is finalized, the next phase is to develop a strategic risk management plan depending upon the risk profile. While significant efforts can go into an initial risk assessment and strategic risk profile, the real product of this effort should be an action plan to enhance risk monitoring or management actions related to the strategic risks identified. The ultimate value of this process is helping and enhancing the organization's ability to manage and monitor its top risks. Communicating the strategic risk profile and risk management action plan. The next important phase of the activity is to communicate the risk profile and the risk management plan throughout the organization. The primary objective of this communication is to build an understanding among the people of organization regarding the top risks being faced by the organization and how to manage those risks. It helps to focus on what those key risks are and potentially how significant they might be. A second focus is the communication of the management's expectations regarding risk to help reinforce the message that understanding and management of risk is a core competency and expected role of people across the organization. The risk culture is an integral part of the overall corporate culture. The assessment of the corporate culture and risk culture is an initial step in building and nurturing a high performance, high integrity corporate culture. Implementing the strategic risk management plan. This is the last stage of the strategic risk management process. The real value resulting from the risk assessment process comes from the implementation of an action plan for managing and monitoring risk. These steps define a basic high-level process and allow for a significant amount of tailoring and customization to reflect the maturity and capabilities of the organization. Strategic risk assessment is an ongoing process, not just a one-time event. Reflecting the dynamic nature of risk, these 7 steps constitute a circular or closed loop process that should be ongoing and continual with the organization. Approaches to the strategic risk management. Risk identification and assessment are the important stages before developing any risk management action plan. The action plan for managing the risk is always going to be different depending upon the nature of the risk and the type of the organization. Various approaches have been developed over a period of time for managing the risk. Some of these approaches can be discussed as. So this slide shows us the different approaches that can be used for managing the strategic risk in an organization. These are risk avoidance, risk optimization, risk retention, combination of risk, sharing of risk, and hedging of risk. Now let us discuss all these approaches one by one. So the first approach that can be used is the risk avoidance. This principle is based on the possibility of totally avoiding the risk that has been identified. It can be done by not performing the activity which is having any type of risk associated with it. If any particular activity or a product line has significant risk attached to it, then company may simply decide not to continue or to go for that particular activity or a product line in order to avoid the associated risk completely. Risk avoidance can be a perfect option for managing risk, but it is said that higher risk leads to the greater returns. So, taking no risk or complete risk avoidance may not be an ideal approach to follow any organization. Another approach is the risk optimization. Optimization or reduction of risk refers to creating a balance between risk attached to some operations and benefits of the operations. It includes all the measures to be taken in order to reduce the effect of hazard itself as well as the vulnerability leading to the hazard. It also includes the steps to mitigate physical, economic, and the social vulnerability. The next approach can be risk retention. Risk retention refers to the acceptance of loss or benefit arising out of a risk when it takes place. This strategy is viable when risks are small enough to be transferred at a cost higher than the loss arising out of the risk. On the other hand, the risk can be so big that it cannot be transferred or insured at all. This method is useful when probability of the occurrence of risk is very low and some reserved created over a period of time can take care of the loss arising out of it. The next approach is combination of risk. Combining the risk is possible. When one company is facing many risks at a time, it becomes necessary to understand all such risks and their nature and relationship inter se. For example, in a capital market, there are various risks such as high volatility risk, lower liquidity risk, etc. It is worthwhile to assess the risk caused by these different factors and combine them to mitigate the risk, as the ultimate goal is to increase the return and reduce the risk. Principle of portfolio management is the best example of combination of the risk. Sharing of risk. Sharing of risk is known as transfer of risk also. This principle refers to sharing of risk to some other party who has developed expertise in such risk. That party may be an insurance company or any other party who is an expert in handling the risk. In such case, company will have to pay compensation to the other party for sharing the risk. Sharing of risk can also be done through a risk retention pool. The last approach of managing risk can be hedging of the risk. Risk arising from the fluctuations in prices or foreign exchange rates may be covered by hedging them using the financial derivatives. Company can enter into forward contracts with some financial institutions to hedge the risk of these said fluctuations. There are various special contracts like forward contracts, futures, swaps, options, and insurance policies are available to hedge such kind of risks. Okay friends, let us summarize the module now. One has to map the certainty and uncertainty in order to determine the degree of risk involved in the operation. When all the parameters are clearly known and are fixed, then there is a complete certainty and no risk involved. Strategic risk arises from the fundamental decisions that management takes concerning the strategic objectives of a particular organization. It is the risk of failing to achieve those objectives. Strategic risk management is company's response to such risk. It involves the identification, assessment, and management of the risk in order to ensure the accomplishment of the strategic objectives. Different type of approaches have been developed to manage the strategic risk. Responsibility for managing the strategic risk lies on the board of directors. In order to manage the risk effectively, board needs to understand the major strategic risk involved and the major problems that could occur within the operations due to associated risk. Risk and initiatives cannot be separated from business decision making. However, directors can ensure that a wide view is taken of risk management to restrict or limit the trouble that a risk can cause to the operations of an organization. Thank you.